Hello there, Paradise Preview is back. I'm joined by Graham Wilson from Beyond the Waves as we look ahead to Celtic's game against St Johnstone after the international break.
So Josh, we're coming up to another lunchtime kickoff. This time it's going to be home to St Johnstone, or in America as we call it, St Johnstone. As we were saying before the international break, it was good timing for that. We had several players picking up injuries, key players that are really important to not just our league campaign, but also the Champions League. Now, hopefully, they're going to be regaining their fitness. They're going to be available for this weekend tie, as well as some of the new signings, most notably Miko and F.A. Ambrose. Now, Miko just arrived back in Glasgow this morning, I believe, so it's questionable as to whether or not he would start. It's quite likely, though, that we'd see some action from him, maybe getting substituted on. It would be great to see. F.A. Ambrose is a completely different story. He's had to move his family and move a lot of his possessions from Israel. He won't be arriving in Glasgow, I believe, until the very last second. So probably not going to be available this weekend, but certainly would likely be traveling with the team or welcoming Benfica for that midweek Champions League tie. Now, this game against St. Johnstone, coming off of the heels of the just absolutely dour draw with Hibs at home a couple of weeks ago. What are your expectations this weekend, Josh? I mean, we're going up against St. Johnstone here. They're dealing with all sorts of issues. They have 7 players that haven't really trained much at all, if any, this week due to a virus. Steve Lomas has been accused of sexual harassment, as reported in the Daily Record. A lot of things going on with St. Johnstone at the moment. It's a good opportunity for Celtic to get a tune-up for that midweek tie against Benfica, get some confidence back, as well as bring some players in and back into the starting 11 that have been out due to injury. What are your expectations?
Well, we've not had a clean sheet in domestic football since our game against Aberdeen on the opening day. So far in Europe this season, we have been really good, but we've not really taken some of that urgency into our SPL games against Inverness, Ross County, and most recently Hibs. We've conceded a goal in every single one of the games and looked a little bit dodgy at the back. So hopefully for this game, we can get a little bit more composed and have that urgency going forward. The international break has given quite a few players the chance to get a rest, such as Scott Brown, Anthony Stokes, Ledley, and Wanyama. So hopefully they will, be in a position to compete for a starting slot. Basically just get to a full strength squad again and get prepared for the big game against Benfica.
Yeah, I would agree completely, Josh. I mean, we've seen, obviously out with the midweek Champions League game at Parkhead against Helsingborg that iced our spot in the Champions League group stages. We've seemed to create many chances. I mean, most notably the Ross County game away, and then certainly again that Hibs, the draw at home with Hibs. We create chances, but especially early on in the games, but we can't seem to put them away for one reason or another. Now, another player that has been not at their best, at least in my opinion, is Gary Hooper. I think that the international break, some time away, may be just what he needs to get that hunger back and get refreshed and recharged. We mentioned Miku. Perhaps would see some starting action, but again, it's early doors now. Georgios Samaras, unfortunately, because of the international break, once again comes up and bites us. He's not going to be available. That's going to be a big mess. I mean, who would have thought a year ago we would be saying that? But he's been an integral part of the side ever since. Miko hopefully will fulfill much of that function. Plus, perhaps and likely a bit more with a bit of an advantage in terms of his ability to finish. Another player that obviously is prone to picking up injuries and falling in and out of the starting 11 is Chris Commons. He's been one of our most dynamic players thus far. But the middle of the park seems to be a question mark at this point. With Joe Ledley going down, Victor Wanyama had to be substituted at halftime at the last game at Celtic Park. So a bit of a question there. Now, Scott Brown is available for this game after finding out that he had the degenerative hip injury, and he's certainly going to be available for the midweek tie against Benfica. Can you see Scott Brown starting this week?
Well, Scott Brown said that, personally he feels like he could play, but, it's really down to Neil Lennon whether he even, gets a starting selection, even if he's 100% fit Personally, I think Neil Lennon might just rest him a little bit for the Benfica game and make sure, that Brown's got 100% of his engine just, firing for that game, rather than, about, 90, 95%. And also reduce the risk of picking up, like a wee little niggle and injury here or there. Depending on what tactic Neil Lennon's got for going into the Benfica game, whether Scott Brown will be, one of his top men for that game. Personally, I don't think we're too pressured into starting them, so I would say, put him on the bench.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's no sense in really rushing him back and like you said, picking up, a bit of a niggling injury that may be associated with that hip injury, maybe compensating for that. With that being said, it might be a good shout to substitute him on late in the game, especially if we're forced to start one of our young players, Filip Twardzik, who's had flashes of brilliance. Let's be honest, in the preseason and the early goings thus far, but he still is young. Still trying to feel his way into the starting 11. I think it's absolutely essential that Victor Wanyama plays on Saturday against St Johnstone. He really is the bedrock of the side thus far. But I mentioned a little bit about St Johnstone's issues off the park coming into this game just now, but they're really having their struggles early on in this SPL season. I mean, they're at the bottom of the table. What's the status with St. Johnstone there? I mean, who are some of the signings that they brought in? Who are some of their danger men, and what can we expect?
Well, they were actually quite active during the last transfer window. They brought in Craig Beattie, Gregor Taddy, and Nigel Hasselbank. I think they brought in Tam Scobie as well. I'm not too sure about that. But basically, they've signed a few quite big players in the SPL standard, and they've not been too good this season. Currently, the bottom of the table with 2 points, -5 goal difference. So St Johnstone will be looking to hopefully pick up the form and get a little bit more higher up the table, and getting some points off Celtic would definitely give the squad a boost at this kind of low time.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they're just seeming, just far too anemic, and especially now, St. Johnstone does have a tendency to be dangerous on the road, especially at Celtic Park, as we found out. But thus far in the season, I mean, they've only scored 2 goals in their 5 games. So, certainly this is an opportunity, like you said, to pick up the clean sheet, to retain our confidence and regain the confidence, especially amongst the back four, and pick up some momentum going into that midweek tie that's going to be absolutely essential to our Champions League endeavor. What are your predictions in terms of the starting 11? Maybe the setup tactically. How do you think Neil Lennon's going to go about this? It's certainly hard to predict, considering players coming back from injury, new players coming in, and Neil Lennon's tendency to experiment a bit in terms of tactics or adjust accordingly. But what's your instinct telling you?
Well, it's always a bit tricky for a manager come back from an international break. I think he'd probably just go with a solid 4-4-2 formation. First on goals, obviously, Matthews. At centre back, there's a wee bit of selection that we could have at centre back for a change, because Kevin Wilson has been good recently. So I'm not real sure whether to choose between Kevin Wilson or Thomas Rongnier. I think it really just depends on who's fitter. Thomas Rongnier, I'd personally put him in front of Kevin Wilson and have him next to Charlie Mulgrew, and then Azagiri at left back. In midfield, Forrest on the right, who had a really good game for Scotland in midweek. Hopefully Ledley and Wanyama in the middle. I'm not sure how fit the two of them are. And then at left wing, Chris Commons, and then up front, maybe Guy Hooper and Anthony Stokes, who has been come back from injury. He's not played for a little while, and last season he was our top goal scorer away from home. I think it would be real good for Anthony Stokes, if he got a start and got a goal or two, or at least just had a good performance, because he can be a valuable player for Celtic. And then obviously you've got the Miku, who could come on as a sub, and I like to see a wee bit of him against St Johnstone. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I believe Anthony Stokes is still out. He had surgery a couple weeks ago. I'm not quite certain in terms of when his assumed return is going to be, but even still, it's a question mark in terms of the players that were out injured, how much have they trained during this break, and certainly in the days before that? I mean, obviously Joe Ledley carrying a bit of a groin strain. I can't imagine he would have been doing much training even in the lead up to the international break. So hopefully he's going to be ready for that tie midweek. I mean, those are the type of players that you really tend to lean on. But starting from the back, I mean, Fraser Forster obviously, Izzy on the left, left back. I tend to agree with you personally. I prefer Thomas Ronya, but I think that Neil Lennon's tendency at this point, especially given the fact that, like you said, Kelvin Wilson has been excellent as of late. I think that he's going to start alongside Charlie Mulgrew, and a bit of a question mark as well over on the right-hand side at fullback with Adam Matthews picking up a slight injury towards the end of his international game. Was seen limping at the end. That's one of those where you don't want to put too much pressure and have a younger player such as Adam Matthews playing too much football early on. I think Michael Lustig has been found out in several occasions playing center half, but he's acceptable at right back. So I probably see Lustig over there on the right, Chris Commons on the left. Then the midfield, I'd have to say Wanyama and Twardzik. Now, fingers crossed that Wanyama can remain fit because, like I said, I mean, he is probably the most dynamic player that we have at the moment. I would probably have a formation of 4-1-4-1 with Wanyama playing the holding role, but the second bank of four would be, for me, Commons, Twardzik, James Forrest, and...
well, you could put Ledley or Brown in there.
Well, I was thinking Brown, could be substituted in for Twardzik on the sort of later stages, but Commons, Twardzik, Wanyama playing the holding role, James Forrest, and I guess we're left with Miko. I mean, I guess that's really where we are. We don't have another striker to speak of other than Lasud, who was Lasad rather, who was the second striker that we picked up. A bit more of a target man. I can see him maybe getting substituted on more so than finding a starting role. But I mean, who knows? We may be surprised. He doesn't have the greatest strike rate at a top level, relatively speaking. But you never know. Fingers crossed, and he can come good as well. And then of course Gary Hooper. But I like a 4-1-4-1. I think that we can get a bit more attacking against this St. Johnstone side. Victor Wanyama cleaning up just behind that bank of four. And, hopefully we can play a higher line. I mean, that's what Kelvin Wilson offers you. He does have the pace that the other center halves, in my opinion, don't quite have. It's just going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's so many variables going into this week, and it's hard to predict. But speaking of predictions, I mean, the outcome, I think, is a bit more assured, at least from my end. I obviously I don't want to jinx anything, but what's your thoughts in terms of a scoreline?
I like to see a 2-0, just confident, not really giving away anything, dodgy at the back, and just really attacking the ball up front, but not having a really high work rate that we're going to risk any injuries. Just control the game and just get ourselves really ready for that game against Benfica. Get the confidence, get the form, and make sure everyone's fit. Because for me, the Benfica game is vastly more important for me than the St Johnstone game. So 2-0, maybe even a 2-1. St Johnstone, they can always kind of get a dodgy goal and that. What's your prediction?
I'm really, really confident with this, and that scares me in a sense because I tend to very rarely have this sort of feeling, but I do nonetheless. I think after the last game against Hibs, as well as just watching some of the comments that are coming out from the players talking about the excitement that's building, looking ahead, anticipating Champions League football. I think there's a swagger going about this team within certain players. They're going to come out and look to stamp their authority on this game very early. Like I mentioned before, they have set up opportunities. They just haven't taken them. I think this is the game where we're going to be able to break out of that. We're going to, in addition to taking advantage of mistakes being made by our opponents, we're really going to stamp our authority and show our quality with this and picking up goals of merit. So I see a 4-0.
Good. Well, this has been another episode of Paradise Preview, and we'll be back, hopefully, again for preview against Benfica.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, we'll see you then. Hail, and keep the faith.